The demolition crew arrived at dawn on a Tuesday. I watched them from my kitchen window, 2 flatbeds, a backhoe, for men in hard hats carrying clipboards. They set up orange cones along my driveway like they owned the place. The foreman knocked twice, then tried the door. Locked, obviously. I was standing 10 feet away with a cup of coffee, watching him through the glass. He stepped back, pulled out his phone, and made a call. 30 seconds later, Marlene Voss pulled up in her white Lexus. She's the HOA president. She wore a cream pantsuit and sunglasses that cost more than my monthly insurance premium. She saw me through the window and smiled. Not friendly, victorious. She mouthed 2 words, "Final notice." I opened the door halfway. Didn't step out. Just stood there in my flannel and boots, steam rising off my muck. "Morning, Marlene." "Mr. Kendrick," she said, pulling a folded document from her purse. "The board voted unanimously. Your structure is in violation of Article 12, subsection 9. We've provided you with ample opportunity to bring it into compliance. As of today, we're exercising our authority to remove the non-conforming building." I looked past her at the backhoe, then at the crew, then back at her. "That's so. The vote was certified. The contractor is licensed. Everything is in order." I took a slow sip of coffee. Let the silence sit. "You got a demolition bond for this job, Marlene?" Her smile tightened. "Of course we do. We're fully insured." "Good," I said. "That's real good. Who's the underwriter?" She blinked. "I don't see how that's relevant. Humor me." She glanced at the foreman, annoyed, then pulled out her phone and scrolled. "Crestline Indemnity Group." "What?" I nodded, set my mug down on the porch railing, pulled my own phone out, and opened my work email. Turned the screen toward her. "Because I'm the senior risk officer at Crestline. And that bond you're holding? I'm the one who signs off on claims." Her face didn't move, but her neck flushed red. "This demolition isn't insured, Marlene. Because you never disclosed to us that the property owner disputes the authority. That's a material misrepresentation. Your bond's void the second that backhoe touches my land." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're bluffing. Call the office. Ask for me by name. Tom Kendrick, Senior Risk Officer, Commercial Surety Division." "Oh wait." She didn't call. She knew. Let me back up. 6 months ago, I bought a cabin on 18 acres at the edge of Ridgemont Pines, a gated community in the Virginia Highlands. The cabin was built in 1987, cedar locks, stone chimney, wood shake roof. It predated the HOA by 9 years. The property had been grandfathered in under the original covenants. I had the paperwork. I checked everything. But Marlene Voss didn't care about paperwork. She cared about aesthetics. And my cabin, with its weathered logs and moss-creeping roof, didn't match the stone and stucco McMansions the HOA had approved for the last decade. 2 months after I moved in, I got my first violation notice. Non-conforming roof material. I replied with a copy of my grandfathered status. They ignored it. The violations kept coming. Peeling paint. Unapproved landscaping. Driveway width. Each one cited Article 12, subsection 9. A clause added in 2019 giving the board authority to remove structures that materially degrade community standards. I responded to every letter with the same documents. My deed, the original 1987 covenant, the county's grandfathered structure acknowledgement. They responded with fines. $500. Then $1,200. Then a lien notice. Then the demolition vote. They held it at a special session I wasn't invited to. I found out from my neighbor, a retired lawyer named Ed Halloran, who attended and took notes. The vote was 5-0. Marlene had stood at the podium and described my cabin as a blight and a liability to property values. Nobody asked to see my deed. Nobody mentioned the word grandfathered. The board authorized up to $85,000 for removal and disposal. They hired the contractor the next day. I didn't yell, didn't file an injunction, didn't call a lawyer. I just went to work, pulled the bond application Ridgemont Pines HOA had submitted 8 months earlier for a different project, and cross-referenced it against the demolition contract Marlene had just signed. The bond covered $100,000 in general liability, but it explicitly excluded coverage for actions taken against properties where ownership or authority was disputed. Marlene had signed an affidavit swearing no such disputes existed. I printed the application. I printed my deed. I printed every violation notice I'd sent back with documentation attached. Then I put it all in a folder and waited. Now, standing on my porch with a demolition crew 10 yards away, I watched Marlene's face cycle through confusion, anger, and something close to panic. "You can't do this," she said quietly. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just telling you what happens if you do." The foreman was watching us now. So were his guys. Marlene turned to him. "Start on the shed." "Marlene," I said, "if he touches anything on this property, your bond's void. That means if something goes wrong, injury, equipment damage, anything, your HOA's on the hook. Personally, no insurance, no coverage. You sure you want that liability?" She stared at me. I stared back. Then she told the crew to pack up. The crew left. Marlene sat in her Lexus for 5 minutes, phone pressed to her ear, before driving off without looking at me. I finished my coffee on the porch, watching the tire tracks they'd left in my gravel. Then I went inside and sent a single email to my supervisor at Crestline, flagging the Ridgemont Pines bond for review and attaching the signed affidavit Marlene had submitted. By noon, Crestline's legal team had issued a formal notice to the HOA. Any demolition action taken against my property would void their coverage. I got copied on it. So did Marlene. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. What I did hear from was Ed Halloran. He came by that Saturday with a six-pack and a grin I hadn't seen since I'd moved in. "You just made yourself a legend," he said, handing me a beer. "Marlene called an emergency board meeting yesterday. Tried to get the vote reversed. Got outvoted 4-1. They turning on her? They're scared. Greg Parnell's a dentist. Susan Malloy owns a yoga studio. None of them have deep pockets. The second you mentioned personal liability, they started doing math." I nodded. "Good. There's more," Ed said. "Susan asked to see the original covenant. The one from '87. Turns out nobody on the current board has ever actually read it. They've been working off the 2019 amendment, which was written by Marlene's husband. Conflict of interest? Oh, it gets better. Douglas Voss is a land use attorney. He drafted the amendment. Marlene pushed it through. And 3 of the properties that got approved under the new aesthetic standards, built by developers who paid Douglas as a consultant. I let that sit for a second. You're saying they rewrote the rules to benefit paying clients. I'm saying Marlene's been running this HOA like a private contracting pipeline for 5 years. And nobody noticed because nobody looked. Ed left an hour later. I spent the rest of the weekend going through every document I had. Deed, covenant, county records, HOA minutes from the last 3 years, minutes Ed had quietly provided, printed on his home office laser jet. The pattern was obvious once he saw it. Every non-conforming structure the HOA had flagged in the last 4 years had been older homes. Cabins, A-frames, split levels built in the 80s and 90s. Every property that got approved was new construction. Marlene's violation notices weren't about codes. They were about clearing land for developers who paid her husband. My cabin wasn't the first. It was just the first one owned by someone who knew how to read a bond application. Monday morning, I got a certified letter. Not from Marlene, from Douglas Voss, Esquire, writing on behalf of the HOA board. The letter informed me that the demolition had been postponed pending further review, and that the board was reevaluating its enforcement priorities. It also threatened me with a lawsuit if I made defamatory statements about the board's conduct. I read it twice. Then I called Ed. "They're scared," he said. "That letter's a bluff. If they sue you, you get discovery. You pull every contract Douglas ever signed, every approval Marlene ever pushed through. They don't want that. What do they want? They want you to go away. Sell the cabin. Move. Let them forget this happened." I looked out my window at the ridgeline, the oak trees I'd cleared brush from last month, the stone path I'd laid myself. "Not selling," I said. Ed laughed. "Good. Then let's make them real uncomfortable." That night, I drafted a formal complaint to the county zoning board. I cited the 2019 amendment, the properties approved under it, and Douglas Voss's financial relationship with the developers. I attached the original covenant showing my cabin's grandfathered status. I attached Marlene's demolition order. I attached the bond affidavit where she'd sworn no disputes existed. I didn't file it. Not yet. I wanted them to know it was coming. I sent a copy to Marlene, Douglas, and every board member. Subject line: draft complaint, for your review. The response came in 6 hours. Not a letter. A phone call. Marlene herself. "Mr. Kendrick," she said. Her voice was flat. "Careful. I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot." "That's so. The board would like to meet with you. Informally. We believe there's been a misunderstanding about your property status. No misunderstanding on my end. We're prepared to withdraw all violation notices. Clear your account. Acknowledge your grandfathered status in writing. I waited. We'd also like to avoid any unnecessary filings with the county. This can all be resolved amicably. What do you want, Marlene? A mutual non-disclosure agreement. You don't file the complaint. We don't pursue enforcement. Everybody moves on. I almost laughed. So I stay quiet while you keep running the same scheme on the next guy. Silence. I'll pass, I said and hung up. 2 days later, the board held another emergency meeting. This time, I was invited. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a timber and glass building overlooking the valley. I arrived 15 minutes early. Marlene was already there, seated at the head of the table. Douglas sat beside her, leather portfolio open, pen in hand. The other board members, Greg, Susan, and a man I didn't recognize, sat across from them, looking like they wished they were anywhere else. I took the seat at the opposite end, set my folder on the table, said nothing. Marlene started. Mr. Kendrick, thank you for coming. We've reviewed your property documentation and confirmed that your structure does, in fact, enjoy grandfathered status under the 1987 covenant. The board apologizes for any confusion. Confusion, I repeated. An administrative oversight. We're prepared to issue a formal letter confirming your status and clearing all fines from your account. I opened my folder, slid a single document across the table. This is the zoning complaint I'm filing tomorrow unless 3 things happen tonight. Douglas picked it up. His jaw tightened. 1, I said. Every property flagged as non-conforming in the last 4 years gets the same review mine did. If they're grandfathered, they're cleared. No fines. No liens. Written confirmation. Greg nodded slowly. Susan was already taking notes. 2. The 2019 amendment gets put to a full community vote. Transparent process. No backroom approvals. Marlene's hands were flat on the table. She didn't move. 3. Marlene resigns as president. Effective tonight. Douglas stood. You can't. Sit down, Douglas. It was Greg, the dentist. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. He's right. We've been signing off on your approvals for 5 years without asking questions. That stops now. Susan looked at Marlene. I'll second his terms. Marlene's face went white. She looked at Douglas. He shook his head slowly, but she wasn't stupid. She could count votes. This is extortion, she said. It's accountability, I said. You tried to demolish my home on a fraudulent vote. I'm giving you a way out that doesn't involve the county, the state bar, or a lawsuit. Take it or don't. She stood, walked to the window, stayed there for a long time. Then she turned. I'll resign, but the complaint doesn't get filed. Agreed. If all 3 terms are met. She looked at the other board members. None of them spoke. Fine. I left the meeting 40 minutes later with a signed letter confirming my cabin's status, a board resolution to review all prior enforcement actions, and Marlene's resignation, effective immediately. Greg Purnell was named interim president. Susan Malloy volunteered to chair the Amendment Review Committee. Douglas left without speaking to anyone. 3 weeks later, the county received an anonymous complaint about Douglas Voss's consulting agreements. The state bar opened an ethics investigation. I didn't file it, but I knew who did. Ed Halloran had friends at the county clerk's office and a long memory for people who abuse process. The 2019 amendment was put to a vote in September. It failed 83-12. The original 1987 covenant was reinstated as the governing document. For properties that had been flagged as non-conforming were cleared. 2 owners who'd already sold under pressure contacted attorneys. I don't know how those cases turned out, but I know Marlene and Douglas moved to North Carolina 6 months later. I'm still in my cabin. The roof still would shake. The logs are still weathered. Last month, I replaced the stone steps leading up to the porch, used river rock I pulled from the creek at the edge of my property, same as the original builder did in 1987. Ed comes by most Saturdays. We drink beer on the porch and watch the ridgeline. Sometimes we talk about the HOA. Mostly we don't need to. The new board sent me a letter last spring. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in serving on the Architectural Review Committee. I wrote back and said I appreciated the offer, but I'm not much for committees. I am, however, real good at reading contracts. And if they ever need someone to review a bond application, they know where to find me.